Prices, policies, and a literal $3 billion paradox. For hundreds of thousands of you who invested in green energy, the math has suddenly, and frankly frustratingly, been turned totally upside down. We're going to unpack the numbers, look at the shifting policies, and expose a massive paradox right at the heart of it all. So let's get into it.
Now, right off the bat, we're hit with a pretty jarring reality, an immediate, drastic price jump for the hardware itself. Just a few months ago, a standard 580-watt solar panel ran somewhere between $16,000 to $17,000. But step into the market today, that exact same piece of tech has spiked to between $26,000 and $27,000. I mean, that is an enormous leap in upfront capital just to get your foot in the door. But as we're about to see, the cost of the panels, well, that's just the beginning.
Because alongside that hardware price hike, we need to understand that the foundational policy that made solar so attractive in the first place, net metering, has been fundamentally dismantled. For years, net metering was the big incentive. It was the promise that your investment wouldn't just generate power, but it would interact dynamically with the grid to actively lower your monthly costs. But that system, as consumers knew it, has been completely eliminated. It really changes the entire financial reality of having solar panels on your roof. Let's trace the exact math here to see how this builds a completely different reality for a household. Imagine you consume 1,000 units from the grid, but your solar panels are diligently producing 900 units and feeding them back. In the old days, you simply returned those 900 units, and the math was just simple subtraction. You were billed for the remaining 100 units, and importantly, you were only taxed on those 100 units. Now, flash forward to the new policy. You consume the same 1,000 units. Your panels produce the same 900, but under this new structure, you're billed for the entire 1,000 units you used, and you're taxed on the entire 1,000 units. That offset? It's completely gone from the billing phase.
So the crucial takeaway here is this transition from a highly favorable unit-to-unit calculation to a system where you are billed and taxed on every single unit you pull from the grid, regardless of what you produce. The older framework acted like a true exchange, right? A one-for-one trade. The new system essentially ignores your production when calculating your taxable grid usage. If you pull a unit from the main power supply, you pay for it and you pay taxes on it, full stop, even if your panels are working overtime pumping electricity back out.
And this brilliantly illustrates what feels like a real bait and switch for consumers. Think about a cautious consumer trying to perfectly break even. Say you use 300 units from the grid and your system produces exactly 300 units. Under the past system, 300 minus 300 equals a zero bill. Boom, energy independence. But today, under the new system, even though you produced exactly what you used, your bill is absolutely no longer zero. In fact, it's quite high. You're still paying a hefty premium for those 300 units you pulled, despite giving 300 units right back to the system.
Now, to understand why that perfectly balanced 300-unit equation no longer cancels out, we have to look at the pricing asymmetry. It really comes down to this core concept. The government will give you units at an expensive rate, and the units you return will be cheap. It perfectly captures the imbalance. It's just no longer an equal trade. The electricity you buy from the grid is priced at a premium, while the electricity you generate and push back is essentially bought from you on the cheap. So even if the physical number of units matches perfectly, the financial value of those units definitely does not.
Okay, so now that we understand how drastically the billing mechanics have changed for a single household, let's zoom out. Because this isn't just a localized issue affecting a handful of early adopters. This is a massive structural shift impacting the very foundation of our energy infrastructure. Looking at the numbers, there are currently 466,000 solar consumers who entered into net metering agreements with the government. Just think about the sheer scale of that number for a second. Nearly 500,000 households and businesses took the initiative, spent their own capital, and integrated into the national grid under a very specific set of rules. Rules that have now been completely rewritten right beneath their feet.
And what are those 466,000 consumers actually doing? Well, together, these private citizens are acting as a massive, decentralized power plant, producing an incredible 3,200 megawatts of electricity for the national grid. They are literally generating power for the state. They took the heavy burden of power generation onto their own rooftops, significantly easing the strain on traditional power plants and aging infrastructure.
And when you translate that 3,200 megawatts into economic value, the numbers are just staggering. This private production generates an astonishing $3 billion in savings for the government. Let that sink in. By acting as their own microgenerators, these citizens are effectively saving the state $3 billion that would have otherwise been spent on energy procurement and production costs.
Which brings us to the ultimate paradox we are impartially reporting on today. The very citizens saving the state $3 billion are the ones being hit with heavy taxes and massive electricity bills rather than receiving any kind of relief. They invested the upfront $26,000 to $27,000 for panels. They supply 3,200 megawatts to the grid. Yet, because of this sudden shift to gross billing and the asymmetric pricing of power, they're the ones bearing the brunt of these new, heavy financial burdens.
Leaving you with a final thought to ponder based on the data we've just unpacked. Will this stark policy shift ultimately slow down the necessary transition to green energy? When financial incentives are removed and private producers are taxed rather than rewarded for their massive contributions to the grid, well, what happens to the next 500,000 people thinking about going solar? That's the big question. Thanks for joining me for this explainer. Keep looking at the data, and we'll catch you next time.